For months ago, I went in for what I thought would be a routine laser eye surgery, something I'd been looking forward to for years. I'd worn thick glasses since I was a child, and the idea of finally being free of them felt like a dream come true. The procedure was costly, but my parents generously offered to help cover it as a graduation gift. They were proud of me. I had just finished college with honors and secured a prestigious position at a graphic design firm. The surgery was scheduled 2 weeks before my start date, and everything seemed to be lining up perfectly. The day of the procedure started like any other medical appointment. The doctors reassured me as they prepped me for surgery. I remember feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement as my mom held my hand while the anesthetic was administered. That was the last time I saw her face clearly. Something went terribly wrong during the operation. When I woke up, I was met with excruciating pain and an unsettling darkness. I couldn't see a thing. The doctors later explained that a rare, unexpected complication had caused severe and irreversible damage to my retinas. Despite multiple emergency surgeries, nothing could restore my vision. The darkness was permanent. An investigation revealed that the laser machine used during my surgery had malfunctioned. However, because I had signed consent forms acknowledging the risks, we were told that pursuing a medical malpractice case would be nearly impossible. Lawyers explained that such cases involving LASIK surgery are notoriously difficult to win, especially given the comprehensive disclaimers I had signed. The surgery center conducted its own internal review and labeled the incident as a known but rare complication, avoiding full accountability for the machine malfunction. After weeks of back and forth and the looming threat of media exposure, the surgery center offered a settlement. The amount barely covered the emergency procedures, let alone the long-term costs of my care. To make matters worse, our insurance refused to cover most of my rehabilitation expenses, citing that the surgery was elective. They claimed that complications arising from a cosmetic procedure weren't their responsibility. Their exact words cut deep. Your voluntary decision to undergo cosmetic surgery negates our liability for adverse events. While we're still fighting the insurance company with the help of an advocate, the process has been agonizingly slow. Meanwhile, my parents have emptied their savings to keep up with the medical expenses. They've taken on crushing debt, modifying the house, buying rehabilitation equipment, and funding adaptive technology one now need to function. My dad even cashed out his 401k early, taking the penalty hit just to cover the basics. Despite their best efforts, the financial strain has taken a severe toll on my family. At night, I would hear my mom crying when she thought I was asleep. She and my dad often argued about mounting bills, credit card payments, and loan applications. One night, I overheard her telling him they might have to sell the house if things didn't improve. Knowing that my decision to rid myself of glasses had brought our family to financial ruin left me crushed under the weight of guilt. Adjusting to my new reality was nothing short of a nightmare. Everyday tasks became Herculean challenges. Eating, finding the bathroom, or even just existing felt insurmountable. My parents converted our living room into a makeshift bedroom since I couldn't manage the stairs anymore. They helped me navigate with a cane, learn Braille, and use adaptive technology. My mom left her job to care for me full-time, while my dad worked longer hours to keep us afloat. Adding to the weight of it all, the company that had offered me the graphic design job rescinded their offer within a week of my surgery. Their email expressed sympathy for my situation but was cold and impersonal. The email from my former employer still stung. The position's core requirements include visual design capabilities that are no longer compatible with your condition. In a single automated message, my dream career was over before it had even started. I had spent 4 years specializing in UI/UX design, maintaining a perfect GPA, and completing 3 highly competitive internships to land that role. The $75,000 starting salary would have allowed me to help my parents repay the surgery costs, while also building my own life. Instead, I found myself applying for disability benefits. A humiliating and convoluted process that dragged on for months. My first 3 applications were rejected outright. It took 6 months of stress, advocacy, and appeals before I received any assistance. The monthly payments barely covered my medical expenses, leaving me unable to contribute to my parents' mounting debt. Each rejection letter felt like a confirmation that I had become a burden. Some days, the weight of my new reality left me unable to get out of bed. The darkness was no longer just physical. It seeped into every corner of my life, suffocating and unrelenting. Through it all, my parents remained patient and supportive, though I knew it wasn't easy for them. My mom would spend hours sitting with me, describing the world outside my window or reading aloud job listings for positions that might accommodate someone who was blind. My dad devoted his weekends to teaching me how to navigate our home by memory, counting steps between furniture and adding tactile markers to doorways. Together, they worked tirelessly to help me piece together a life that felt worth living, even when I couldn't see a way forward. Then last month, everything shifted. My older sister, Maya, announced that she was coming home for an extended visit. She'd been living in Europe for the past 8 years, carving out a successful career as a fashion photographer. Her work appeared in major magazines, and from what my parents told me, she had built quite a name for herself in the industry. They kept a collection of her featured magazine covers and spreads, though of course I couldn't see them anymore. Maya and I were never particularly close. She's 10 years older, and by the time I was in elementary school, she had already moved out for college. My memories of her were faint, her teaching me how to braid my hair, tucking me in during rare visits, but our relationship had always been distant. While she was building her career in Europe, I was navigating high school and later college. During those years, she occasionally sent expensive birthday gifts, designer clothes and accessories, but rarely called or visited. When we did speak, the conversations were superficial. How's school? How's the weather? Small talk between two people who barely knew each other, despite being sisters. When my surgery went wrong, my mom had to read me Maya's email response aloud because I was still learning to use screen readers. It was 3 lines long. "I'm so sorry to hear about what happened. This must be really difficult for everyone. Sending you strength during this time." The message felt like a formality, something you'd send to an acquaintance, not your sibling. She never followed up, never called, and never asked how I was coping. For months, I held out hope that she'd reach out, but the only updates I got about her life came through my parents. They would casually mention her latest photo shoots or gallery openings during dinner conversations, as though her accomplishments were supposed to comfort me. Her recent announcement about visiting home was the first direct contact I'd had with her since that email. Mom read the text aloud over breakfast. "Great news, coming home for 2 months this spring. Got someone special I want you all to meet." My dad wasted no time planning a family gathering to celebrate Maya's return, while my mom spent the afternoon calling relatives, excitedly updating everyone. In all their enthusiasm, no one seemed to notice how quiet I'd become. After 8 years of near silence, Maya's return should have been a moment of joy, but instead it filled me with a gnawing sense of unease. Yesterday, my parents called me into the living room. Their voices tense, movements hurried. I could tell something was wrong. Sitting me down, they dropped the bombshell. They wanted me to move out before Maya arrived. They explained that they'd already researched assisted living facilities and even spoken to real estate agents about short-term rentals. They framed it as an opportunity for me, a chance to gain independence. When I asked why this was so urgent, they hesitated before revealing the real reason. Maya's fiancé doesn't know she has a blind sister, and she wants to keep it that way. According to them, Maya thought my presence would make things uncomfortable and ruin the perfect visit she had planned. The air seemed to leave the room as I tried to process their words. When I reminded them that I was still learning basic skills and had no income to support myself, my mom sighed and said they were exhausted from caring for me. My dad chimed in, adding that at 23 it was time for me to live independently anyway. It didn't take much reading between the lines to see what was really happening. Maya had likely given them some kind of ultimatum, and they had chosen her, the successful, accomplished daughter, the one they were proud to show off. And now, they were trying to hide away the daughter who no longer fit into their curated image of a perfect family. The betrayal was staggering. My parents, who had been my lifeline during the hardest moments of my life, were now ready to discard me for the sake of Maya's comfort. The weight of it pressed down on me like an unbearable burden. Over the next few days, I frantically reached out to friends and extended family, but no one was equipped to take me in given my needs. Most of my friends had moved to other cities after graduation, starting their own lives, and the relatives I spoke to were either unwilling or unable to help. Then I remembered my maternal grandmother, the one I hadn't seen or spoken to since I was a child. My mom had cut ties with her parents years ago over what she described as irreconcilable differences. When I mentioned the idea of reaching out to them, my mom's reaction was explosive. She became visibly agitated, forbidding me from contacting them. She insisted that they were toxic and that involving them would only make things worse. Her panic made me even more curious. What had really happened to sever ties so completely? Why did the thought of me reaching out seem to terrify her so much? I began to wonder if there were family secrets I'd never been told, buried truths that had kept Maya distant and our grandparents completely out of our lives. The idea of contacting them felt risky, but it also felt necessary. They might be my only option, and I couldn't ignore the possibility that they could offer answers, if not shelter. My parents have given me just 2 weeks to find new living arrangements. They insist this is for my own good, that it's about helping me become independent, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being discarded like an unwanted reminder of their failure. This isn't about my independence. It's about my sister's desire to maintain appearances, and they're going along with it. I'm torn between respecting the boundaries my mom has upheld for decades or fighting for my right to stay in the only home I know. Reaching out to my grandparents might open wounds I don't fully understand, but at this point I don't see another choice. Am I wrong for considering reaching out to them despite my mother's warnings? Should I fight to stay in my home, even though it's clear I'm no longer wanted here? I feel lost, abandoned, and unsure of what to do. I once tried asking my dad about our estranged family, but he brushed it off, saying it was my mom's business and quickly changed the subject. At the time I didn't think much of it, but after reading your comments I started noticing things I had never questioned before. Like how Maya always seems slightly uncomfortable around me, or how my parents never talk about any relatives on my mom's side. Several of you suggested there might be some deeper family secret, and honestly I'm starting to believe it. The way my mom completely panicked when I mentioned contacting my grandparents was extreme, far beyond what you'd expect for a simple family disagreement. I've decided I need to find my grandparents. A number of people messaged me with tips on how to locate them, and I've started following those leads. At this point, what do I have to lose? My parents are already forcing me out, and I need somewhere to go. If my grandparents turn out to be as terrible as my mom claims, at least I'll have clarity. Update 1. It's been a week since my last update, and I finally talked to my grandmother. After all the encouragement and advice from everyone here, I realized I had to take this step. Reaching out felt like my last chance at finding a safe place. Not just physically, but emotionally. I started by trying to connect with anyone on my mom's side of the family. Without direct contact information, I turned to LinkedIn and eventually found someone who seemed to be related to her, possibly a distant cousin. Reaching out was awkward, and I spent hours debating what to say. In the end, I kept it simple, explaining that I was looking for my grandparents and emphasizing how important it was. At first, they were hesitant. They asked why I wanted to contact my grandparents and seemed uncomfortable, as if they didn't want to get involved. But after some back and forth and a bit of pleading, they finally relented and shared my grandmother's number. The thought of calling her filled me with so much anxiety that I spent 2 days just trying to muster the courage. Was I doing the right thing? I wasn't sure, but I knew I had to try. When I finally dialed the number, my heart was racing. I used my speech-to-text software to make sure I got it right, and after a few rings she picked up. I introduced myself nervously, explaining who I was and that I was her granddaughter. There was a long silence on the other end, and then she spoke, her voice filled with a mix of surprise and weariness. "I didn't expect to ever hear from you," she said cautiously. "How did you find me?" I briefly explained how I'd gotten her number, and why I was reaching out. As I shared my story, about the failed surgery, my parents asking me to leave, and feeling abandoned, her tone softened. She told me she was sorry I was going through so much. That being kicked out when I needed support the most was cruel. But then she added something that left me stunned. "I can't say I'm surprised, not with Maya coming to visit after all this time." I froze. "What do you mean by that?" I asked. "Is there something I don't know?" There was a pause, the kind where you can almost hear someone choosing their words carefully. Finally she spoke. "Well," she began slowly, "there's a reason we haven't been in touch. I don't know what your family has told you, but there's a lot your mother hasn't shared." I admitted that I didn't know much, only that my mom claimed my grandparents hated us. At that, my grandmother let out a humorless laugh. Hate is a strong word, she said. But there's a lot more to the story than she's told you. Then she revealed something that shook me to my core. Years ago, my mother had orchestrated a massive investment fraud scheme that devastated both my grandparents and several other family members. My grandmother explained that my mom had convinced them to invest their retirement savings in what turned out to be a complete scam. When the scheme collapsed, the financial fallout was catastrophic. But the worst part? My mother refused to take responsibility. She claimed she had no idea the investments were fraudulent and blamed others for the collapse. She cut off contact with my grandparents and the rest of the family to avoid facing the consequences. As my grandmother shared this, her voice trembled with a mix of anger and sorrow. "We lost everything," she said. "Our savings, our home. It's why we had to move. Your mother walked away like it wasn't her problem." I sat there stunned. The story explained so much. The severed ties, my mom's extreme reaction to me reaching out, and even Maya's distant behavior. "But why didn't she tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because she's ashamed," my grandmother replied. "And because she's always been good at rewriting history to suit her narrative." My grandmother revealed something that left me shaken. My mother had not just been another victim of the investment scheme. She had been complicit. My grandparents had discovered evidence showing that my mother had received significant kickbacks from the fraudulent scheme she had convinced them to invest in. This revelation had shattered the family and left deep scars. Maya, who had been old enough to understand the scandal, witnessed firsthand how our mother's actions devastated my grandparents' retirement and affected multiple relatives. That was why she distanced herself from our family. Maya couldn't forgive or forget, especially after my mother showed no remorse or made any effort to make amends. I tried to piece it all together. What does this have to do with me being kicked out? I asked, my voice trembling. My grandmother hesitated, then explained. Your parents, your mother especially, are desperate to keep things peaceful now that Maya is coming back. They've been trying to mend their relationship with her for years. And, she paused. I'm sorry to say this, but I think they see you as a complication. Complication? I echoed, confused and hurt. Maya's likely told her fiancé about the family scandal, but having a blind sister who needs constant care might raise too many questions. Questions about where your parents' money has gone, why they can't afford to help you, and what kind of family you're all a part of. It could bring up everything they're trying to bury. The pieces clicked into place. My entire life, I had felt like there was something missing in my family dynamic. The mystery surrounding my mom's side of the family, Maya's emotional distance, and my parents' sudden urgency to send me away. It all made sense now. My grandmother's voice softened. I want you to know this, though. None of this is your fault. You are innocent in all of this. You're our grandchild and we want to help you if you'll let us. Her words made me break down in tears. For the first time in months, I felt wanted, not like a burden to be hidden away. I told her how much it meant to hear her say that after everything I'd been through. Then my grandmother said something that completely changed everything. You can stay with us. We have plenty of space and we'll hire whatever help you need for your condition. You won't have to be alone. I could barely believe what I was hearing. After feeling discarded and unwanted for so long, here was someone offering me a home. A real home. Without hesitation, I accepted her offer and told her I'd need some time to pack and figure things out. My grandparents assured me they'd help with every step of the transition. As I prepared to leave, I knew I couldn't leave quietly. My parents deserved to hear the truth about what I'd learned. I planned to confront them just before moving out. After everything they'd put me through, I couldn't leave without addressing the betrayal. Update 2. The confrontation finally happened, and I've officially moved out. When my grandparents arrived to help me pack, my mom's reaction was explosive. The moment she opened the door and saw them standing there, she was furious. My dad later told me that her face went completely white, like she'd seen a ghost. What are you doing here? She screamed at them, her voice filled with panic. I stepped forward, my voice calm. They're here for me. Her tone turned shrill. What the hell have you done? You were never supposed to contact them again. Why would you go behind my back? Ignoring her hysteria, I asked both my parents to sit down. I told them we needed to talk. Even though I couldn't see their faces, I could feel the tension in the room. My mom's bracelets jingled constantly as she fidgeted, Her nervous tick I knew so well. My dad, as usual, remained silent, which usually meant he knew he was in the wrong. I took a deep breath and started. I know everything. Grandma told me about the investment fraud, the kickbacks, and how it destroyed their retirement. The room fell silent except for my mother's sharp intake of breath. How dare you bring that up? She hissed, her voice trembling with rage. That was years ago, and it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me, I shot back. It explains why you've kept them out of my life, why Maya distanced herself from all of us, and why you're so desperate to get rid of me now. My dad finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We didn't think you'd find out. Of course you didn't, I interrupted. You've spent years covering up the truth. And now you're willing to kick me out to keep up appearances for Maya's fiancé? Do you even hear how ridiculous that is? My mom tried to cut in, but I wasn't finished. I've spent months feeling like a burden, like I ruined this family's finances. But now I see it's not my fault, it's yours. You made choices that hurt this family, and instead of owning up to them, you've been hiding behind me. For once, my mother didn't have a snappy comeback. She sat there, stunned into silence. My dad avoided my gaze entirely, as if the weight of the confrontation was too much for him to bear. I stood up. I'm leaving. Grandma and Grandpa are taking me in. I don't need anything from you anymore. My mom's voice cracked. You're making a mistake. No, you made the mistake, I said firmly. I'm just finally fixing it. With that, I turned and left the room, walking out of the house that had never really felt like home. My grandparents helped me load my things into their car, and as we drove away, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. I think we've heard enough, my grandfather said, his voice calm but firm as he placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. This conversation isn't going anywhere productive, and we won't stand here listening to threats. Let's go. His steady presence gave me the strength I needed to hold my ground. My parents sputtered in response, but their words were just noise now, empty attempts to claw back control. I turned to face them one last time. You don't get to threaten me anymore, I said, my voice unwavering. I'm done being a pawn in your schemes. You've made your choices, and now I'm making mine. I'm leaving with people who actually care about me. My mother looked like she wanted to scream again, but for once she seemed lost for words. My dad stood there silently, his expression a mix of guilt and resignation. It was as if he finally understood that they had pushed me too far. I turned and walked out the door, my grandmother waiting for me at the car with her arms open. I hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of years of pain and betrayal lift just slightly. As I got into the car, I didn't look back. The drive to my grandparents' home was quiet but comforting. My grandmother held my hand, squeezing it gently every so often as if to remind me I wasn't alone. My grandfather hummed softly along with the radio, his presence as steady as his words had been earlier. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt safe. When we arrived at their house, I was overwhelmed. It wasn't just the physical space, though the large, welcoming home was a stark contrast to the stifling tension of my parents' house. It was the warmth, the kindness, the genuine care they showed as they helped me settle in. My grandmother had already arranged for an occupational therapist to come by the next day, and my grandfather had ordered new adaptive technology to make my life easier. As I unpacked my belongings, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and hope. My parents' betrayal still stung, and I knew it would take time to heal from the pain they had caused. But for the first time, I felt like I was finally where I was meant to be, surrounded by people who saw me not as a burden but as family. Over the next few weeks, I began to rebuild. My grandparents' support allowed me to focus on learning new skills and gaining confidence in my independence. They encouraged me to explore career options that didn't rely on sight, and for the first time since the surgery, I felt like I had a future again. Maya eventually reached out through a mutual acquaintance. Her message was brief, apologizing for the way things had turned out and expressing hope that we could reconnect someday. I wasn't ready to respond, but I appreciated the sentiment. It was a start, at least. As for my parents, I haven't spoken to them since the day I left. They've tried to reach out through emails and messages, some apologetic, others defensive. I've chosen not to respond. Maybe one day I'll be ready to hear them out. But for now, I need space to heal and grow without their toxic influence. Sitting on my grandparents' porch one evening, feeling the cool breeze against my skin, I realized something important. I'd spent so much of my life trying to live up to my parents' expectations, trying to be the daughter they wanted me to be. But here, surrounded by unconditional love and support, I was finally learning to be the person I wanted to be. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was starting to thrive. And that, I decided, was the best revenge. I'll never forget my grandfather's steady voice as we loaded the last of my belongings into their car. "Everything is documented," he reassured me. "Your parents' demands for you to leave, their refusal to support you, it's all on record. If anyone should be worried about legal consequences, it's not us." With my grandparents' help, I packed the few items that mattered most: important documents, adaptive equipment, clothes, and a handful of keepsakes. My mom alternated between tearful pleas and sharp threats, while my dad remained silent, his presence as hollow as his words had been. Just before I left, my mom made one final attempt. Her voice was shaky but defiant. "If you leave with them, don't expect to ever come back. You're choosing them over your own parents." I turned toward her, wanting her to feel the weight of my words. "No, Mom. You chose Maya's visit over me. You chose keeping your secrets over having a relationship with your parents. You've always chosen yourself over everyone else. I'm just finally choosing myself for once." The drive to my grandparents' house was quiet, yet peaceful. I could have fallen apart, screaming at the unfairness of it all. But instead I felt a profound sense of clarity. For the first time since losing my sight, I truly saw the truth about my family. My grandparents welcomed me with open arms, both figuratively and literally. They've gone above and beyond to ensure my comfort and independence. An occupational therapist now visits regularly, and they're making accessibility modifications to their home. My grandfather has been tirelessly researching adaptive technologies, always eager to ask if there's anything else I might need. My grandmother sits with me every evening, unraveling the tangled threads of our family's history. For the first time, I'm piecing together the truth I was never allowed to know. A few days after I moved in, Maya sent me an email. She admitted to giving our parents an ultimatum about my presence during her visit. She explained that her fiancé already knew about our mother's past, and she had been honest about having a blind sister. The real reason she didn't want me there, she confessed, was because seeing how our parents treated me brought back painful memories of their betrayal years ago. Maya ended her message with a promise to visit me at our grandparents' house once her stay with our parents was over. Maybe there's hope for rebuilding our relationship, though I'm taking it one step at a time. As for my parents, they've been relentless, alternating between apologies and accusations through countless calls and texts. I've blocked their numbers. Any future communication will go through my grandparents' lawyer, who is helping me secure my legal rights and ensure I'm protected moving forward. It's strange how losing my sight ultimately gave me the clearest view of my family. This journey has been overwhelming and often painful, but I'm finally surrounded by people who genuinely care for me. Not because they have to, but because they want to. To everyone who encouraged me to reach out to my grandparents, thank you. You helped me find not only a safe haven but also a connection to my true family, and the strength to stand up for myself. Sometimes the family we need isn't the one we're born into, but the one that chooses to stand by us when everything else falls apart.